went into the meeting.
It's a great honor for me to introduce today's speaker, Oliver Page. And maybe first up, I have to mention Oliver is a Cornellian. Okay, he got his bachelor's of science in environmental engineering at Cornell. And so welcome back. We're happy
Thank
to
you.
have you.
Thank you.
Enjoy the Cornell grounds and Oliver is also a master's in environmental policy from Columbia. And after his graduate studies, he started to work a number of years as an environmental engineer in the private sector in Chile and Peru. Am I right?
Yes.
I looked that up somewhere.
Mhm. In the mining sector, actually.
Mining sector.
Yeah,
Wow.
I did not enjoy that.
But I guess certainly an interesting experience to have had. Before he joined, afterwards he joined the United Nations Development Program, or UNDP, as an energy and climate change specialist.
Mhm.
And for the past 10 years, Oliver has joined the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, and he's there the lead climate and environment specialist for the Latin American Caribbean region. And was based in Italy, and now is based in Panama City, Panama. Wonderful city. I loved it. I visited last year. Oliver has a deep experience of the region and has led many initiatives that integrate climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies into rural development. And he has also become an expert in mobilizing green financing mechanisms to amplify climate resilience and sustainability of development projects. Today, we will hear from some of the very important work that IFAD is doing in Latin America region. And Oliver will present us on how smallholder farmers are integrating innovative climate resilient agricultural practices and strategies to improve their food securities and livelihoods. So we're talking about smallholder farming. So this topic has many overlaps with my own work. So I'm very excited and thrilled to hear your talk and to learn from you. And I hope, yes, welcome everybody. Join me in welcoming Oliver and the board of yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. You guys can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm Oliver and I work at the International Fund for Agricultural Development.
There's one asterisk. If you stay here in the middle, you don't have the.
There you go.
So just.
Yeah, I'll have to look back once in a while to see what I'm supposed. Oh, I can actually look there. Wow, technology. So yeah, I work at the International Fund for Agricultural Development. I'll tell you a little bit about what that is. I started working on this in 2016. I was coming from a bit of a different background, as you heard. I was working on renewable energy. And then I was hired by IFAD to work on climate change adaptation. I've been working mostly on mitigation before. And when I came to IFAD at that time, this concept of climate smart agriculture was kind of a thing back then. I think FAO had published a paper on it. And there was this idea that there was a smart way of doing agriculture where you would be more productive, you'd make more money, you'd be able to be more resilient to climate change. You would also contribute to climate mitigation. So there's this kind of like, I found it a little bit of a magical solution to climate change and agriculture problems. And my job in a way was, okay, try to apply this in the field, you know, working with smallholder farmers all over Latin America. And this talk is, it's not going to be a technical talk at all. I'm not going to talk about, you know, types of technologies or types of practices and so forth. I'm going to talk more about the challenges I face when I try to develop and implement these projects in the field and kind of the ways we try to get around these problems and the approach that we take to implementing these projects. So just so for context, so you guys understand what the institution I work in is, It's a United Nations agency, but it's also a financial institution. It's a specialized agency with a narrow, but quite ambitious mandate, as you can see, eradicating poverty and hunger in rural areas of developing countries by investing in rural people and their livelihood. So it's purely focused on investing in rural areas, smallholder farmers, the most vulnerable and poor populations. And IFAD works through governments. We provide financing to governments. And strangely enough, we do this through loans. Most UN agencies work through grants. We work through loans. There's pros and cons to this, and I'll discuss a little bit of this. But we provide loans to government who then implement these projects for rural development. The terms of the loan, it depends on the country that we work in and the income level of the countries. It varies from, highly concessional. In the region I work, Latin America, the countries are mostly higher income, so the loans are not that subsidized, if you want to call it that way. In some of the poorer countries, it's very subsidized. It sometimes even comes as a grant. But that's kind of the context. Why the focus on rural smallholders? I don't think I need to explain this much to you guys, but the one fact that's really important, many people tend to think of rural farmers as not very productive, but they produce approximately 1/3 of the world's food. And in some countries, they produce up to 70% of the food for the country. So really, smallholder agriculture is a thriving economic sector. It really provides essential food for many people. However, as we all know, they're among the most impoverished, marginalized, and vulnerable communities in the world. Highly unequal dynamics impacting disproportionately women, children, youth. And this is a fact that you probably don't know. Even though smallholder farmers are, some of the people that are most exposed to climate change, when you hear about climate finance and you think about the Paris Agreement and all the money that's supposed to be flowing to mitigate and adapt to climate change, only 0.7% of that climate finance actually goes to smallholder farmers. You've got the most vulnerable population receiving very little of the money. That's actually part of my job, is to catalyze some of these funds and channel them to smallholder agriculture farmers. So you may have heard of funds such as the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, the Adaptation Fund. Those are some of the funds that I try to mobilize and combine with the IFAD resources in order to be able to do more kind of integral projects that integrate rural development with climate change adaptation measures. We'll see some examples of that later. So this is just to give you an idea of where I work and the scale of the projects that we do. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we have 26 projects ongoing, total of about approximately $600 million in investment. So you're talking projects that are about $20 million each. So they're not huge, they're not small. I like to think of IFAD as a mini World Bank kind of thing. We don't do large investments like the World Bank, but they're investment projects. They're not pilot projects. They have scale. With an outreach of almost 300,000 rural households. And these are kind of the issues that we work on. Certainly my focus is climate resilient agriculture, but there's lots of intersection with water and natural resource management. Huge emphasis on youth and gender inclusion, and to the extent possible, focusing on accessing markets and rural finance. Indigenous communities also, particularly in the Latin America region, it's something that's really important to us and that we try to work a lot with. Okay, so now let's talk about projects, because ultimately, that's the way development works. You do projects, okay? And projects, you present them to somebody reviews them, approves them, makes comments, et cetera, et cetera. It's a whole process. Takes a lot of time to get some of these projects approved. And the way these projects are structured, you need to tell, you have a clear definition of the problem. If it's climate change adaptation, I'm going to work in northern Peru to say something. Northern Peru is experiencing severe drought. I can attribute that to climate change. People need water. That's the problem. How do we address the problem? We're going to do, I'm making this up, I'm going to simplify something. Well, we're going to do irrigation. We're going to drill wells. We're going to do small dams. We're going to make sure that people get their water. This will be done. This investment requires, $10 million. We're going to be able to reach 30,000 people with $10 million. It'll take 5 years. And then by the end of these projects, people who didn't have access to water will now have access to water, and everybody's happy. It's a gross simplification, but that's how you present the project to a donor, to a funder, whatever. Then comes reality, and in climate change adaptation, I find that the more you think about it, the more complicated it really gets, Just the definition of the problem may not easily be defined, because sometimes the problem is, there's drought at sometimes, there's excessive rainfalls at sometimes. So you may get hit by a drought, you may get hit by a hurricane, there may be forest fires, there's all kinds of stuff going on. And that changes from location to location. And it also changes from community to community, how they perceive the problem, what they think the problem is, how it affects them. It depends on what crops you're growing. It depends on what your organizational structure is like. It depends on so many factors. I mean, we go to the field and in villages that are 10 kilometers apart, the problem is completely different. If one is in a slope, one is in a valley, they're seeing different things going on. So just defining the problem is not that easy. And trying to think that there's a standard solution to this is also a bit of a myth. Ultimately, what you need to understand is the solution is very site-specific, context-specific, people-specific, so it's not really easy to define a solution. So then, how do I budget for this? How do I plan for this? How do I say, this is what I'm going to invest in, this is how much time it takes? How do I turn that into practice? And finally, what is the agreed outcome? What does it mean to be more resilient? What does it mean for infrastructure to be climate proof? What are the parameters that we set to measure success? All of these things I find are much more complex than what we present in our projects. And so perhaps what I'm trying to say is when I present a project, I'm presenting a model. And for all its complexities and for all the details I'm asked and for all the research and whatever that may go into presenting a project proposal, it's a schematic. The real world is quite different. So then we go and we give these things to the government. And we tell governments, go ahead, please implement these projects, And we, at IFAD, we supervise the projects, but we don't implement them. So we allow the government to go ahead and implement their projects. First of all, what countries are interested in investing in rural development, it's expensive. It's expensive. As I said before, we're giving loans, so there's a whole negotiation. Should we be taking a loan for this? Should we not be taking a loan for this? Climate change, as you know, is largely not caused by the countries that we're working with. So they're telling us there's an additional cost to manage climate change. How do I deal with that? That's where I come in and try to get a grant from one of these funds or get a subsidized loan or get some kind of complementary financing that will make this attractive to the government. But ultimately, the government obviously is taking a loan and has a strong voice in how they wish to implement this project. Embedding innovation, getting governments to do new things is quite hard. You're working with public institutions, we are working with established structures, and it's all from from how you hire people to how you procure services to all kinds of logistical things that you can't imagine, make it difficult to translate an innovative idea into a project. But the opposite side of that is if a government does adopt this and starts doing things differently, then it's there. Then hopefully that has a catalytic effect that goes beyond the project lifetime and the project duration. So this idea of working with government, you know, it's got its drawbacks for sure, but it also really is a way to cause impact. So now I'm going to walk you through a few examples of projects that we have, just so you get an idea of how we try to do things. It's, once again, this is not a technical conversation. It's not exactly what we do in the field, but how we try to reach the people. Hopefully this will give you some idea of how things may or may not work. We'll start with Nicaragua. We'll do 3 countries from Latin America because that's where I work. Just I think for the sake of this lecture, let's not think about the geopolitical or ideological context of what country we're talking about. You know, I'm not saying that's not important, but for the sake of this conversation, let's assume that the governments that we're working with are interested in rural development and are really interested in just doing the best job they can with these projects, regardless of any other circumstances that may be a factor. So Nica Vida is a project in the Nicaraguan dry corridor. This is one of the poorest parts of Latin America. It's hit severely by drought. Basically subsistence farmers there, but a lot of migration, people trying to move out, and one of the most climate vulnerable places of Latin America. So the project approach here was quite interesting, actually, because we wanted to build on, I mean, these people, even though climate change is making things worse, these people have already been coping with this for a while. So rather than trying to bring in people to tell them what to do, we had students from the Nicaraguan university that studied agronomy, veterinarian sciences, forestry, environmental sciences, and so forth. They went there and lived 6 years with 6 months, sorry, with the communities, and just understood what they were doing, how they were living, how they were coping, try to understand their needs. Then after spending those 6 months, they went back to their university and interacted with professors and kind of got the technical know-how to say, okay, based on what I lived and based on what I've seen, what can we offer to these people that they don't have and that they need? And then based on that, the project then financed the investments back in the communities. And the students went back and were able to apply for funding and were able to work with the communities in order to actually, invest in the solutions that they had come up with. So basically what we had is 3 universities bringing climate change adaptation into the curriculum. 557 students were out there working with 33,000 people. And, they were able to implement investments in soil conservation and improvement, water conservation, efficient irrigation, forest protection, and so forth. Of course, there was a general increase in awareness on climate change, and then we were able to replicate this in El Salvador, where the Salvador University actually came up with an agriculture and climate change specialized program, which was the first that they did in Central America, which was quite cool. So what I like about this project is just the idea of sending people out there, learning what people were doing, what the communities were doing, and only then coming back and offering investment and solutions. The second project is completely different from what I told you before. This is in Brazil. Also in the Brazilian Northeast, conditions are kind of similar to what I was describing in Nicaragua, perhaps not as poverty-stricken, but really some of the poorest regions in Brazil. It's the semi-arid region. It's called the Caatinga biome. The picture actually, I took that picture. You can see the Caatinga biome is actually quite biodiverse and quite rich if you leave it standing, but it's been largely degraded and deforested, and it's really um, quite in quite bad shape. And of course, drought there is also a huge issue. And the government, I mean, this is the government of Brazil. They have huge support programs for these communities, but they were mostly focused on provision of water. So drilling wells, doing dams, cisterns, and so forth. And our project, what it's trying to do is to switch that and scale up agroforestry practices and bring water access in 5 states. So what we're trying to do here is to do this at scale. So this is a partnership between IFAD, my institution, the Green Climate Fund, which is a climate fund. BNDES is the National Development Bank of Brazil, and 5 state governments for a total investment of $400 million. So we're trying to do like massive agroforestry project. How are we going to do this? Basically transforming the extension services that the states provide, both via their own staff and via NGOs to implement agroforestry practices, and at least 3 years of insight technical assistance to work with the farmers to implement agroforestry practices, build peer-to-peer networks and farmer field schools to replicate successful practices. I mean, that's the thing. In Brazil, the pilots are there. You know, these practices are being done. Once again, the Caatinga is a very rich biome that if you use it correctly, it actually generates water. It doesn't need much water inputs if you use the right practices. But it takes an effort to get there, and it takes investment, it takes time, and it takes technical assistance. So that's what we're hoping to do with this project. And I think that the challenge of this one, it's really, as I mentioned before, a scaled program. You know, working with the federal, state, municipal, local levels. You know, as I say, these things have been done in a small scale. Can we get Brazil to really deploy a large-scale agroforestry program? So I can't report any results on this one yet. I've been working on this since 2017. It's been a long time. It doesn't mean that it's a failure. It's just that it takes so much time to get the wheels moving in this type of initiative. So now we're at the stage where the states are already hiring the technical assistance NGOs. They're already hiring their project management teams. It's happening. Hopefully next year we'll be planting trees, but it hasn't happened yet. And I think the lesson of this is this type of scale project takes time, takes effort, takes dedication. It's not easy to do these things, to pretend that these things are going to happen in 3, 4, 5 years. A final example, Bolivia, accesos. This one was way back. This was when I first started working in IFAD. And there the government basically told us, we don't want to work in a particular ecosystem. We don't want to work in a particular region. If we're going to take your money, we want you to target poor, vulnerable farmers wherever they are. If any of you is familiar with the Bolivian geography, it's hugely diverse. You're talking from tropical rainforests to 4,500 meter mountains and everything in between. So this project was trying to implement climate change adaptation solutions across this wide variety of ecosystems. And the methodology that was really interesting that was introduced there was this idea of talking maps. Because even written language in some of these communities is, you know, they're not used to communicating that way. So basically what we do is we gather the community, get people together, get some people with technical knowledge involved, and then start talking about how they saw their community today and how they would like to see their community in the future. What were the problems that they were perceiving, what they think you know, were the main challenges, how they could be addressed. And then the project would shape that into an investment project and actually fund the initiative. And the interesting part of this one was also that IFAD committed itself to financing investments at the community level, but the municipalities also committed themselves to funding investments kind of at the broader territorial level. So if there was like a river that was flooding, it was the municipality that would do the, would stabilize the slopes and kind of, make sure that that didn't happen. Or if there was a need for kind of a larger water reservoir, it was the municipality who would invest in that. So it was a combination of project funds at the community level and municipal funds at the territorial level, which was a nice kind of integration of both sources of financing and being able to tackle the challenges at different levels. This one, since it was a while ago, we actually had an impact evaluation of this project, which is a bit of a more sophisticated way of analyzing whether a project was any good or not. They were able to identify that we did have a positive economic impact, mostly due to diversification. It's not that they made more money from any given crop or any given line of production, but since we promoted diversification, it gave them more stability of the type of income that they could get. And there was a big shift from livestock to agricultural assets. So basically they understood that livestock was capital and labor and capital intensive and not really that good business compared to working with agricultural assets. Improved resilience. How was that measured? I mean, one of the ways it was measured, it was self-reported. Do you feel that you can better cope with the type of challenges that you're facing? And people will respond yes. But also, we measured the adoption of and uptake of practices like agroforestry, soil erosion control, terracing, stuff like that, climate resilient crops, and water harvesting. And this project, I think I haven't emphasized this enough in general, how our projects try to target women whenever possible. It's pretty well documented that if you're able to work with women head of household or single mothers and so forth, this is something that has quite an impact. So in this project, we were able to measure significant improvement, that should say, in income for women head of households. But unfortunately, we weren't able to measure much progress in kind of decision-making power and the power dynamics within the community. And that kind of points to some of these structural issues that we find in the communities that you can't always, we try to address them through projects, but we can't always do that. Okay, so wrapping up a little bit, what lessons can we draw from these types of experiences, And when I list these things, they may seem obvious, but that doesn't make them less true. Context is everything. You can have the technology, you can have the economic incentives, you can devise social, you can plan whatever you think is going to work, but if the community doesn't take it up, then it's just an idea, and that's not only at the community level. For the type of projects that we do, it's also aligning with the kind of the way the government wants to do things. I mean, the three projects that I mentioned are quite different, basically because the Nicaraguan government really wanted to work through education programs. The Brazilian government was really interested in doing this investment at scale. The Bolivian government was really just wanted to reach as many people as possible wherever we were. So we have to adapt to that situation and design a project based on what the borrower wants, making sure that that ultimately somehow benefits the farmers that we're targeting. Ownership is essential. I think this is quite evident from my talk. We can't go there and tell people you should change what you're doing. I wouldn't want anybody to do that to me, and I wouldn't listen to them. And I don't expect anybody to listen to me or to any of our well-paid consultants when they go to the field and say, this is what you should be doing. That's not the approach. We bring inputs, we bring knowledge to the extent possible, but we have to come up with solutions together. We really have to spend the time and the money, but mostly the time to have a common understanding with the people we work with the communities that we work with, to agree on a solution and to have people be willing to change or to do whatever it is that we're suggesting that they do. Because if they don't, a project can pay for something and somebody will pick it up, but then it's not going to have a lasting impact. Climate change adaptation is about managing uncertainty and reducing risk. The idea that we can adapt to climate change, and you're not gonna experience any further problems. If a Category 5 hurricane, I mean, we have a project right now in the tip of Cuba where the hurricane is going to hit on agroforestry and coffee production and so forth. Our project is not Melissa resilient. Melissa is the name of the hurricane, right? It's not, unfortunately. Hopefully some of the crops will survive, but this is really about managing uncertainty and more about being able to deal with the less visible aspects of climate change. The kind of, basically when I think about resilience is that you can work within this framework before the project, and then you can work within this framework after the project. So you expand the limits of what kind of impact you can tolerate. But there's always going to be the big event that you really can't plan. So that's unfortunately the reality of climate change. But to the extent that we can help people manage uncertainty, reduce that risk, increase that bandwidth of resilience, then I think we're on the right track. And then rural development it's not a time-bound process. I mean, go back to what I said about how we design these projects and we put indicators and outcomes and targets and whatever you want to call them. But really, these processes take time. People start adopting practices, it starts spreading, they need technical assistance, they need financial support, they need to access markets. Any behavioral change takes time. Any process, if you really want to transform something, you need to be there continuously. And it's really hard to do that in a project that's designed to be time bound for 5-6 years or whatever it may be. Persisting challenges that we face. I think the technology and knowledge gap is super wide, and it's a bit of the reason why I'm here at Cornell this week. Is that I think any challenge that I face in these projects that I mentioned to you, somebody here at Cornell has thought about it, and is thinking about, either the technological solution, this is the best thing that could be done for growing potatoes in the Altiplano, or, this is the best way for decision making in a group context. This is the best way for conflict resolution. Whether it's economics, social sciences, technology, people are thinking about these things at Cornell, at the CGIAR centers, at academia. Not much of that is making it to my projects. I have to be honest. It's really hard to find a way to make this reach my institution. If it doesn't reach my institution, it doesn't really reach the governments that are working on this. If it doesn't reach the governments, it doesn't reach the people. So I think my main challenge right now is how to really be able to use and apply and deliver all the knowledge that exists in institutions such as this one, and being able to apply them in these projects. Scaling up rural development investment is super challenging. Pilots, they don't always work, but it's easy. It's not easy. That's disrespectful, but you can do a pilot. You can test something. You can see if it works or if it doesn't work. You can document it. You can probably publish a paper on it. And it's a pretty contained environment where you can control as many of the variables as possible. When you're trying to do the same thing as in the project in Brazil, 100 times or 1,000 times, how do you manage to do this at scale while maintaining the local quality, the need for local contact? Regardless of the size of the project, I need quality technical support to reach the farmer. Whether that's a project for 1,000 farmers or 500,000 farmers. it's much easier to do it for a small number of people because of course, I can look over the whole process. What IFAD is trying to do is trying to do these things at scale through government. So that's quite a challenging thing to do. It's costly. It's really comparatively costly, you know. We go back to what I was talking about, climate finance flows and how little of this goes to smallholder agriculture. It's much easier to finance a wind farm or a large-scale solar plant, or even, you know, bridges and roads for climate-proof infrastructure. The benefits of investing in rural people are huge. I mean, I think it's a WFP study that says that you spend $7 in recovery for not investing $1 in prevention when a disaster strikes. So just from that angle, it's economically viable. Just, you know, prevention of migration to cities, you know, obviously improvement of livelihoods of people. There's a lot of benefits to rural development, but comparatively, it's costly. And when you do the analysis of how much does it cost per person, it's going to be more expensive than other types of investments. So it's hard to leverage financing for this type of project. And ultimately, projects still continue to be a little bit of a bubble. We have hundreds of projects. World Bank has hundreds of other projects. Everybody has projects. And we're not really learning as much from each other as we should. I think there's a lot of potential to learn, to understand. One of the key problems is that in the development business, it's really not fashionable to report on failure. Everybody wants to be successful. The donors want their money to be successful. The agencies want you know, such as mine, want to report on success, and everything works. Where, as we all know, the best way to learn really is through failure, through understanding what went wrong, processing that, acknowledging it, and avoiding the same mistakes in the near future. That's not really happening in the development world. And, you know, just the sheer business of developing and implementing these projects keeps us so busy that it's kind of hard for us to look out and the bigger picture and kind of use this immense wealth of knowledge and investment and everything that's going on to really learn and do things differently and better. So that's my talk. As I say, I just wanted to give you a taste of what we face as development practitioners in the field, you know, the reality of this business. Happy to talk to you, answer any questions about, you know, what I like, what I don't like, what works, what doesn't work. But I hope it's been interesting and useful to you guys. Thanks.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. And yeah, to hear. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I had two questions. One is like, do you have like internal funds? So the governments like do the proposal of what they want to invest in, or is more like you reach them and then together you develop a proposal for a project and then submit it to a funding agency? Or, yeah, how did that part works a little bit?
We actually have our own funding. IFAD has its own source of funding. It gets replenished every 3 years. Unfortunately, Latin America gets less and less of the resources just because of the income levels of our region. So a lot of it goes to Africa and to Asia, really. But yes, we basically work with countries based on demand and say, you know, we could potentially do, I don't know if you're Peruvian or you're just wearing the T-shirt. So we'll work with the government and we'll say, you know, we have the potential to allocate, you know, $20 million. Do you want to start working on a design with us? And then we'll collaborate with them from there. And once again, if I find an opportunity to bring more funding from an external agency, then I'll try to do that as well from the climate funds. And then I try to integrate those two things together. That's a mess. I mean, I do that, but it's, you know, you don't want to get into the details of that. But, you know, the getting a project approved is already complicated. Getting two projects approved and getting them to work together is also quite a challenge. But that's the way we work. Yes.
Thank you so much for your talk.
Can you speak up so that we
Thank you for your talk. I think you were talking about behavioral change
Mhm.
and how it's important to inspire those people in the area to contribute to the change. And I was wondering, how do you inspire those people as a change maker?
I didn't catch the question. How do we? How do we? Inspire. I mean, first of all, there's no one size fits all. And I'm very much of a non-prescriptive approach to things, perhaps too much so, but I basically try to build into my projects always a space for dialogue with the community and always a space of generating consensus, because I don't believe that anybody has the right solution to a given problem. I think the solution to the problem is whatever we agree upon. And we all come with different backgrounds and experiences and so forth. And if we agree that this is, and you know we have an idea of where we want to reach, but we're not sure how to get there. So we build consensus and we generate these spaces of dialogue so that communities participate, and ultimately most IFAD projects work, at least in Latin America region, work on demand. There will be a demand from the community saying, we would like to invest in this, and we would like to invest in that. We guide that process so that it's aligned with our goals. But if it comes from them, I find that it's much more likely to succeed.
we have some questions online that we may into then.
Our first question, what 3 universities were involved in sending students to Nicaragua for the NICA project?
I have the names, but I don't know them by heart. I'm sorry, but I can, if I can send them via chat, I actually have them. Okay. But I know there's 3 universities. I actually had them in the PowerPoint, and then when I had to reduce the text, I deleted them yesterday. Yeah.
Do you think different types and weights of social capital have an impact on adoption rates?
Absolutely. And that's the challenge, I mean, one of the types of communities that I really like to work with is Indigenous peoples, because they have a very different type of social capital. They have a lot of knowledge. And once you start working with Indigenous people and allow them to express themselves, you realize that it's not only technical, it's just a different way of seeing the world, basically, in which the relationship with nature is a lot different, and the role of the community vis-a-vis the environment is completely different. And that, mostly what we do with Indigenous communities is try to protect them. Try to enforce legislation that leaves the forest standing or wherever they leave standing, because they are quite comfortable living in their environment as long as it's not harmed. So that's an example to me of how that is very strong social capital that really doesn't need that much investment. It needs more protection. And then there's all kinds of other, in Mexico, we work a lot too. And Mexico has this structure where they're called ejidos, which are kind of social cooperatives that work on maize production and so forth. And they also have a very strong culture of collaboration, of working with each other, of communal land property. So, you find these different contexts in the region, and that completely shapes the type of intervention that you have.
How flexible, in terms of loan, like you want to work with the Indigenous, but you have to invest through a government, the local government. And how flexible is that the local government will do what you want to do?
Great question. I mean, I can't work with communities that the government doesn't want to work with. That's the simple answer. I find that, I've had few experiences where the government I mean, you can tell when a people is interested in a certain population or a certain community and so forth. I've had governments tell me, I don't want to work with Indigenous peoples through your project because I already have another project that works with Indigenous peoples, for example. So, explicitly, I don't find so much exclusion of particular groups, but I can't say it doesn't happen, and it's part of the negotiation that we have to have with governments in terms of, we do a mapping. We basically, once again, in order to get an IFAD project approved, the one thing that you have to demonstrate is that you're working with the poorest and most vulnerable people. So we'll do a mapping of where the most vulnerable people are in the country, and we'll engage in a discussion with the government. Where do you want to focus your resources? Obviously, not every project focuses on the entire country, so that's where the country does get to choose, for whatever reason, a geographical area or type of population. So.
Thank you. My question is that, do you work with NGOs, for example, if they have proposal they can submit to IFAD, or they have to go through the government to conduct the project?
We do have the grants window. It's a lot smaller, but the grant window does open occasionally, and NGOs could submit proposals of $500,000, $1 million, or something of the sort. It's
So through,
sorry.
Do you execute also through NGOs? No?
Well, we execute through NGOs if the government wants to execute through NGOs. Okay, so once again, there's no project where the borrower is not the government. So the borrower, I borrow the money, I can execute as the borrower however I choose, and a lot of our projects are executed through NGOs. But we do have grants windows where NGOs can apply, and we also have a thing called the Indigenous Peoples Facility where Indigenous Peoples communities can apply. Those are smaller projects, they're about $50,000 each, but those are the communities, Indigenous communities can apply direct.
Specific are they from the country offices or,
No, they're the calls for these projects.
Yeah.
They're usually region specific, but then like as usual, Latin America gets the short end of the deal in these grants, but we'll get $10 million that we can allocate as grants, for example, and then Africa will receive 50 million.
average, how long a loan, like average?
How long does it take?
Duration.
Do they have to return the loan?
Oh, how much, the repayment period? I mean, there's two different things, is the project execution period and the repayment period. Project execution period is 5, 6, 7 years. The repayment period, it depends on the concessionality of the loan. It can be up to 40 years. So many of these projects are like 0% interest for 10 years, and then you pay back from year 10 to 30 or something. It depends on the country.
I have a question. So before you approve the loans, so does IFAD also checks the just to pay back for GDP countries and also for the situation?
Yes, I mean, I don't do that, but there's a whole division that does that. And as I said at the beginning, like the terms of the loan depend on the GDP of the country and so forth. We have extremely low default rates, simply because it's usually the priority of countries. First of all, the money's not that much, to be honest, and it's the priority of the countries to be in good standing with international institutions such as ours. So default is not a major problem. That's why we can offer pretty decent interest rates as well. Any of you two?
one more question, then we maybe wrap up.
I had a question about your technology and knowledge gap, and you guys are world-renowned institutions with, in theory, like the best resources and access to knowledge. Like, how do you think how do you see bridging that gap?
That we are seen as a
IFAD is a world-renowned institution. You have access to money, you have access to governments, you have access to like
Yeah.
like lots of resources.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still seeing this big gap in knowledge kind of sharing and collaboration. Like, how do you see that bridging something?
Well, it's a great question. I don't know is perhaps the direct answer, but yes, we are an institution with, sizable resources and so forth, but a large majority of those resources go to the programs themselves. So we're a financial institution. The origin of this is a fund, so it's more of a financial institution than a technical assistance institution. We are focused on developing projects, lending the money, if you want to put it this way, making sure that the that the money is paid back and that the projects are executed are executed under the parameters that they were approved. We don't have a huge amount of technical staff. We don't have a huge amount of human resource to kind of shape these projects. So there we rely on partnerships with, FAO is one of our large partners. We have a huge network of consultants, associated institutions, and so forth. But, the reality is that anything that's not directly related to the project is basically an overhead. And in today's development world, overheads are not the most popular thing in the world, and they never have been, to be honest. So it is really hard to find a way to step beyond the kind of narrow project orientation and to really establish that world-class top knowledge that I think all of us need to do these projects.
Thank you so much, Oliver.
Thank you.
Before it's done.